Hello, everybody. Good morning to those that follow us from Iberoamerica, and good afternoon to those who follow us from European Union and in other countries in the European continent. We had 225 people registered from 19 countries in this second webinar to commemorate the 500th anniversary of the coronation of Charles V, Dreams and Nightmares of an Empire. That is people from Finland, Belgium, Bulgaria, Czech Republic, France, Portugal, Italy, Netherlands, Mexico, Peru, Luxembourg, Germany, Argentina, United Kingdom, Sweden, and Canada, also Austria and Brazil. So to those of people who is following us, thank you very much for registering. And we are going to start with the first speaker today. She is Maria de Fatima Reis. I invite her to come to the stage for her presentation. She is a PhD in modern history by the University of Lisbon, where she is a professor. She is a general secretary of the Portuguese Academy of History and director of the Sephardic Studies Research Center at the University of Lisbon. And I should say also she's member of the scientific committee of the Roots of Charles V. The research she's doing has been focused on the history of charity and health and the history of the Sephardic social networks. And the title of her presentation is Portraits and the Sephardic Diaspora, the Brothers Faleiro and Magalhães at the service of Charles V. Well, this is on top an special year because we are commemorating this first circumnavigation of the war. Commanded at the beginning by Fernando Magalhães. So, Maria de Fatima, thank you very much for joining us in this webinar for this special occasion of the commemoration of the 500 years of the coronation of Charles V. And the floor is yours. You have 30 minutes, and then we'll have a few minutes for questions after your presentation. Thank you very much, Maria Fatima.
Thank you. A greeting to everyone who are participating in this webinar. I must say that from the first moment of the organization of this meeting, I sought to associate the evocation of the coronation of Charles V as emperor with the evocation of the circumnavigation voyage of Fernando Magalhães. My communication has two moments. First, to highlight the importance of the historiographic debate around Magalhães' naturalness and the importance for cultural roots. Second, is to highlight the role of Magalhães and the Faleiro brothers at the service of Charles V and their contribution to the circumnavigation voyage. So this is for me an opportunity to remember Fernando Magalhães, who committed himself before Emperor Charles V to find a connecting passage for the Atlantic to the Pacific. But it's also an opportunity to recall the contribution of two Sephardim to this project, the Faleiro brothers. To fulfill the project of finding a connecting passage from the Atlantic to the Pacific, it was necessary to solve the longitude problem. This knowledge was premised to Fernando Magalhães by the Faleiro brothers. I must say that if the name of Fernando Magalhães has had since now total impact because it is linked to circumnavigation voyage of the globe and to the knowledge of the Earth as it is necessary to add to this achievement not also Juan Sebastián Elcano, who, as we know, completed the return journey, but also, and in my opinion, less talked about the Faleiro brothers. So let's see the first objective of my communication. As I said, it was the historical recognition of this groundbreaking voyage that made Fernão de Magalhães a universal figure. This is the reason for the historical and patrimonial interest regarding his birthplace. If doubts persist until now about Magalhães' naturalness, leaving his namesakes and other hypotheses aside, some of them inconsistent, Sabrosa, Ponte da Barca, and Porto, all in the north of Portugal, are among the locations most often mentioned by historiography. Some places have, in many ways, appropriated the memory of Fernão Magalhães, and as a result, those who nowadays want to visit the place where the navigator was born do not have the task made easy. This topic is for me very interesting when promoting cultural roots. That's why I highlight this. But let's see a quick overview of these three locations, or better, these hypothesis three locations. First of all, Porto. Until the 19th century, Porto was the city most referred. This was based on the information provided by Fernão de Oliveira in the preface to the report of a book entitled The Voyage of Fernão de Magalhães, written by a man who was in his company. This book was published between 1560 and 1570, where Fernão de Oliveira talks about a contract established between Fernão de Magalhães and Rui Faleiro, with Juan Aranda, overseer of the Casa de Contratación in Sevilla, in which Magalhães figures as a neighbor of the city of Porto. A neighbor means natural from or resident in. In 1860, another historian, Ferdinand Diniz, suggested that Sabrosa, also in the north of Portugal, could possibly be the birthplace of the navigator, supported on two testimonies that have since been proven wrong. One from 1504, in which Magalhães refers to his altar in the city's church, and the other from 1580 by an alleged navigator's nephew named Francisco da Silva Teles, in which he talks about the Magalhães coat of arms in the house of Pereira. That leads to belief that he was born in Sabrosa's house of Pereira. Another locality, also in the north of Portugal, Ponte da Barca, was asserted as birthplace by several historians, namely António Baião, José Queiroz Veloso, Avelino Jesus da Costa, Joaquim Veríssimo Serrão, and more recently by Amândio Barros, based on two documents found in the Civil Archive by José Toribio Medina. One was the lawsuit filed by Lourenço de Magalhães to the Council of the Indies, in which he claims the navigator's inheritance. It's from 1567. And the other was a letter from Charles V to the King of Portugal to intercede for two people from Ponte da Barca who were named also Magalhães for being, as they say, relatives of a server of the Spanish king. This letter is dated from 1580 in favor of two brothers, Simão Barreto de Magalhães and Francisco de Magalhães, who had been sentenced to death for having murdered a judge in that locality, in Ponte da Barca. Then the king supposed they are relatives of Fernão de Magalhães. That's why this letter was endorsed to the king of Portugal. But what can we say? Magalhães was Portuguese. When he went to Spain, then he changed his name to Fernando de Magalhães. We also know that Magalhães learned science in his country of birth. That is true. And we can also say that less problematic will be the naturalness of the brothers Francisco and Rui Faleiro, born in the second half of the 15th century, possibly in Covilhã, due to Jewish presence in Beira Interior, to which its origin is linked. Beira Interior is in the central Portugal region. Let's now go to the voyage. The circumnavigation voyage took place due, as I said, to a Portuguese, Fernão de Magalhães, whose mission at the service of Charles V turned out to be contrary to the Portuguese interests. Seeing that the Portuguese king, Manuel I, did not welcome the navigator's proposal, probably because it was incompatible with the Treaty of Tordesilhas, Magalhães adapted the expedition to the Spanish interests, presenting his plan to reach the Spice Islands, the Maluco Islands, by sailing west and thus obtaining the patronage of Charles V. What we know about if the science behind it is Portuguese, that's no doubt that the political and economic aspects are Spanish. Magalhães was almost right, as the Maluco were located on the limits of the Portuguese sovereign territory. But some questions remain until now. Did Magalhães intend to travel around the world, the globe, or did he simply aspire to reach the Maluco Islands and return? Well, we do not know the answer for sure. We know that it is most likely that this mission was to prove that the Maluco belongs to Spain, thus contradicting King Manuel I of Portugal. And we also know that Magalhães did not finish the expedition that was concluded by the Spanish navigator Juan Sebastián Elcano. Let's go to the second objective of my communication. If neither one of the Faleiro brothers eventually took part in the expedition, it is recognized that the brothers Francisco and Rui Faleiro contributed to the circumnavigation voyage and contributed also to the development of the nautical science at the time. This line of understanding benefits a lot from the study made by Veríssimo Serrão from the memorial addressed to Charles V in 1531 by Francisco Faleiro, for which it is known that these brothers arrived in Seville in 1517 to join the Fernão de Magalhães expedition, most probably in the context of the persecution of Jews in Portugal. This memorial was published by Veríssimo Serrão in 1969. Let's note then Rui Faleiro, in the process of the negotiations for Magalhães voyage before Charles V, Francisco has his name engraved in nautical books, with the publication in 1535 in Seville of a book titled Treaty of Sphere and the Art of Navigation. It's important to say that Francisco Faleiro is the first known author to use the sun to determine the magnetic declination. It is also believed that the Spanish pilot Pedro de Medina used the treaty of Francisco Faleiro for his book titled Art of Sailing, that was published 10 years later, in 1545. And it's also believed that the mathematician Juan Pérez de Moya also recurred to the book of Francisco Faleiro to write his Art of Sailing, that was published in 1564. And maybe even the mathematician and cosmographer Pedro Nunes, well known, was surely influenced by the ideas of Francisco Faleiro. The knowledge of Francisco Faleiro was acknowledged by Charles V, who gave him a certain amount of money for the work he had done in the preparation for Magalhães voyage. He did not take part in that voyage like his brother, but it's possible that they did not take part maybe due to the strained relations between Faleiros and Magalhães. Must say that Francisco, prior to his account to Charles V, in which he complained of having been excluded from the voyage, as well as the many expenses he had incurred on his brother's illness. Payments, we know that there are registers very documented that payments continued after the voyage. We know that Francisco remained in Castile, making reports as a cosmographer and paid for that. And what about Rui Faleiro? Rui Faleiro did the nautical regiments for the voyage, namely the elaboration of the regiment for the determination of the longitudes. This was essential for the success of the Magalhães voyage. Reason for Magalhães associate the cosmographer Rui Faleiro to the expedition. For illness or for other reason, Rui was removed from the voyage by a royal letter. He returned to Portugal, where he was imprisoned for almost a year. The historians says that maybe due to problems with the confidentiality policy, maybe, we are not sure. Later, he was released through his brothers Francisco Diligence. Then he returned to Seville, and what we know about him is that he ended up going mad. Following his removal from the expedition, Magalhães commanded Rui Faleiro to give him his studies on the determination of longitude at sea, which, after the initial refusal, according to the chronics, will have happened. The chronics Fernão Lopes de Castanheda and João de Barros says that. But there was a problem. During the voyage, when the astrologer Andrés de Saint-Martin tried to experimented that calculation, Andrés de Saint-Martin conclude that the calculation don't have any value at all. This regiment has been lost for centuries. The historians believed that the calculations of determination of the longitude contained in the relationship of an author very known, António Pigafetta, that was published in 1525, who accompanied Fernão de Magalhães, were indeed due to Rui Faleiro, that we are talking about. Carlos Amoretti, Joaquim Bem Saúde, Luciano Pereira da Mota are of this opinion, and also the Admiral Teixeira da Mota, who verified that in a Spanish journal of the end of the 19th century was published the test with the same title as Pigafetta's, but was indeed a copy of the lost Faleiro regiment. Intending to obtain longitudes through the variation of magnetic declination, removed from the expedition, perhaps because Magalhães realized that little value of the calculation process, we must say that Rui Faleiro tried to solve the longitude problem. Reason, I think, for pointing out his contribution to the art of sailing and to remember these two Sephardic brothers, Francisco and Rui Faleiro, and its role for the circumnavigation voyage in a time of Iberian dispute over the dominion of the seas, in which these cosmographers and Magalhães offered Charles V the chance to reach the islands of spice by sailing to the west. I must also say that recently the historian Luís Filipe Tomás, in a book that he published last year, the Magalhães drama, says that the navigator at the service of Charles V realized too late that the Spice Islands were in the Portuguese territory. Faced with his error, he did not know what to do, and up letting himself be killed stupidly. We don't know, maybe. He attempted to return to Spain again by Pacific, so as not to be intercepted by Portuguese ships. Still according to Tomás, Magalhães would know when he arrived in Philippines in 1521 that he was more or less north of the Moluccas. Therefore, he must have realized that he had made a mistake, that the Moluccas were in the Portuguese hemispheres as demarcated by the Treaty of Tordesilhas. According in this opinion, Magalhães got on badly with the King Manuel I to prove that the Moluccas belonged to the Spanish, but if he recognized this mistake, he would be bad at Spain, and if he did not recognize this position, he would be wrong with his conscience. For Tomás, this position is understood as the Magalhães drama. It's an interesting interpretation. But some conclusions, because the time is going on. The voyage must necessarily be understood in the light of the strategies and ambitions at the time. It means the internationalization of political problems, the voyage of technicians across the peninsular border that justifies the presence of the Faleiro brothers, the growing competition between the Iberian kingdoms and the attempts to appease them, the challenge of other European powers to the Mare Clausum doctrine, and its effect that Magalhães planned voyage with the Faleiros brothers, namely with the help of Rui Faleiro, who helped him calculating longitudes. Yet, just for finishing, I cannot fail to mention another controversial understanding of Fernão de Magalhães, which is a recent interpretation that is maybe the navigator would not have been a traitor to Portugal, as many times it's said, but a secret agent at the service of King Manuel I in the court of Charles V. Maybe this is difficult to prove, but the authors are José and António Matos e Silva, and they say that maybe he was a secret agent in order to negotiate with Spain under favorable conditions the acquisition of the Maluku Islands, which eventually did happen in 1529 under the Treaty of Saragossa. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Maria de Fatima, for this presentation, who also give us some lights about these people that maybe not everybody knows, the Faleiro brothers, and the role they play in the, let's say, in this first adventure around the world that we are celebrating this year, and the information that Magallanes needed from them. When most of the people also is saying that Pigafetta was the main person, let's say, providing this information for navigation. I think it's very interesting you provide us with this information, also with this dispute about the origins of Magallanes, and I'm sure that this special year where we are commemorating this first circumnavigation is being very hot in Portugal, also to claim the origins
Yes.
of Magallanes. And I would like to know which is the situation right now from all these cities, because if I understood it you rightly, it was agreed that Ponte da Barca is the place where he was born by most of the historians. But what is happening right now with the other municipalities, which is the, let's say, the reaction of the other municipalities that were named in your presentation that also claim the origins of Magallanes?
Thanks, Miguel. It's a very interesting question, because each of the localities has, in fact, developed each other collective memory through street names and through other forms. For instance, Ponte da Barca, which has, in fact, the consensus of several historians, inaugurated in 2015 a center called Fernão de Magalhães Heritage Interpretative Center as a space that pays a tribute to the navigator's maritime adventure through the use of modern technologies. But the other localities also did some things in order to make sure that the navigator is from them. For instance, Porto as not an avenue, as not only an avenue named Fernão de Magalhães, but also a neighborhood called Fernão de Magalhães, a school called Fernão de Magalhães, and in 2019, last year, Porto held a cultural event called the Week of Magalhães in Porto. It was an event that very people was amazing about it, and even a council on surrounded area of Porto, Vila Nova de Gaia, where is located the monastery to which Magalhães has probably given a donation, exhibited the Porto Cartoon 2019 special prize called Fernão de Magalhães. Represented Fernão de Magalhães beating the earth as it were a fruit. It is very interesting. And Sabrosa reinforced the collective memory with place names, with sculptures, with evocative street signs, and what I said in my presentation. If you enter in the website of the Sabrosa municipality, you find there the house of the navigator. Mm-hmm. We don't know if this is the house of the navigator. It's very polemic, but this is what happens.
Okay, thank you very much. We are lucky that the historians are there to give us some lights about this question, because I can imagine that during these years the disputes are being stronger. It's not something that is happening probably in the last years, but during especially these 2 years from the years 20 until 23, that the travel will finish. 22, sorry, that the travel
22,
finish.
yes.
That we are commemorating. There will be more fights trying to claim. And I would like to know which is because you talk about the Magalhães drama, which is something interesting, and which is the vision right now in Portugal about Magalhães?
It's difficult to say, but the most recent position is that I have mentioned at the final of my communication. What Portuguese want to highlight is that Fernão de Magalhães just went to the Charles V to present a project that had not been occurred at Portugal from King Manuel I. Nobody wants to see Fernão de Magalhães as a traitor. No, nothing like this. But what the Portuguese want to underline is that all the knowledge of Magalhães was learned in Portugal, in spite he has gone to Spain.
Okay. Please, I ask the people who is following us if they have some questions. Then they can use the questions label, who is in the right side of their screen. When they look at the screen, there is a window there with where there is the chat and the questions. So if you have any questions, please send it to me, because I still have a couple of questions. And if you don't have questions, it will be me who is asking the questions to solve my curiosity. And I have another question, because you mentioned that well, after the no of Manuel I, the King Manuel I, Manuel I, who say no to the project of Magallanes. Magallanes was very smart, and he went to Carlos V, presenting him the travel of the species. So he has to change the project and the plan, and so he combines Charles V. But which one was his first project? Which was the project that was presented to Manuel I and why it was not attractive for him. Do you know? Do you have any information about that?
What can I say? um, if I go to the position I just said, maybe according to this hypothesis, Fernando Magalhães could have had instructions from uh, Manuel, from the King Manuel, um, to go to straight to the route he wanted to, but King Manuel maybe says that this could be eventually into contrary position to the Treaty of Tordesilhas.
Mm-hmm.
And this was the real problem in a moment that the two Iberian countries were in dispute. And so it was better not contradicting the treaty that was accorded years before.
Okay, so it was mainly the respect of this treaty and the law.
Maybe it's difficult to know, Miguel.
It's difficult. It's
It's
difficult to
very
know.
difficult to
And
know.
I also have a question about these two brothers, the Faleiro brothers, who maybe they are not that well known by most of the people following us, but I think they are very interesting people, and also very they play a very important role, as you saw in this first circumnavigation. And my question is which role they play in the negotiation of the travel with Charles V?
Uh, I say that first, the participation of the Faleiros brothers in the preparation of the circumnavigation voyage is well documented. As far as we know, one of the brothers, Rui Faleiro, was more learned than his brother. So he was responsible for organizing the nautical regiments.
Mm-hmm.
However, according to a chronicle of the time, Damião de Góis, it was Magalhães who presented the project to Charles V. Why? Damião de Góis says simply this, because Magalhães spoke better the things of the sea than Faleiro. But the knowledge was from Faleiro.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very difficult to answer your question. But what I think is that the negotiation itself with Charles V was made by Magalhães. Although he made it clear that he needed the knowledge of the Faleiro.
Later. Okay, okay. So that is important remark. So at the end, Magallanes or Magallanes, how we say in
See?
Spanish,
Yes,
was the strategic and the, let's say, a kind of a person who really understood the project from Faleiro and was able to present and to convince Charles V.
yes,
And we could say that that was because we are talking about the commemoration of the coronation of Charles V this year. And
yes.
at that moment where the decision was taken, Charles V was also being coronated. It was the year when he was coronated. It was probably the first decision, and probably, would you agree that was the most important decision he took maybe in his life, or at least the decision that play a most important impact in the world as we know it right now?
I'm sure. I'm sure of that. The impact, the world as we know, it's indeed due to the circumnavigation voyage. I'm sure. I'm sure of that. And the memory it stands up all goes on of this idea.
Mhm. Okay, so I think we can finish with this last comment because it links us also to this commemoration of Charles V. And why we talk about Magallanes, because it was during this special year when Charles V was coronated like a king, and
Yes.
that he took this first decision that, in our opinion, changed also the war, and it was the beginning of the globalization. Not maybe as the globalization we know right now, but the beginning of the
The
globalization.
beginning of the globalization.
The
Yes, it's
globalization.
true. Yes.
So, Maria de Fatima, thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you very much for answering our questions. I see, maybe because we have a few minutes, I have a last question that is coming from the public. Our friend, should I say, Jesus Baigorri, ask you, how do you explain the Sephardic diaspora from Portugal to Spain when Spain had issued the decree of expulsion of Jews in 1492? Any comment on Magallanes slave Enrique de Malaca? Interesting question.
Yes, this is a great problem. The transit of Jews in Iberia. If in the 15th century the Jews came from Castile to Portugal, it's true. Then in the later in the century, the Portuguese go also to Spain, the Portuguese Jews, just because it was a time that the Jews circulated in the Iberia very just not only for knowledge but also for commerce and the families were also linked about. So the problems of the transit of Jews in the Iberia, and then from the Iberia to other regions where the Iberia was present, from Orient to the north of Africa to the Occident, it's been linked to the conditions that happened in the Iberia, such as in Portugal or in Spain. I mean, the Inquisition that was established, and then the Jews that circulated for other locates where they can be a better position. The north of Europe was also an opportunity. So it's clearly that transit in the countries was usual, very usual.
Thank you very much, and thank you also for answering this question from Jesus Baigorri, who also goes into your main topic of research, no, how it is the Sephardic the diaspora. And now we have to tell you, see you later, and maybe if you want to join us for the questions later. And thank you again very much for your presentation, for your communication, that will be also published. Let's say not the publication, but the video will be published in our YouTube channel. So, Maria de Fatima, thank you very much. But before coming back to I have a last question from Michael James. Maybe fast.
Yes, I see. O word falaram about as conversas.
Yeah, okay.
It's possible, very possible.
Mm-hmm.
By that time, most of the Jews were conversos. So it's an hypothesis.
Okay, thank you very much. If you have, if people have more questions, you can still put them in the question side, and maybe Maria de Fatima can answer them by writing during the presentation of the next
Okay,
speaker.
okay,
So thank you
okay.
very much, Maria de Fatima, and we are going to call to the next speaker to the stage, Martin Vermeer, please, if you can come to the stage, and we'll say goodbye to Maria de Fatima, and thank you very much again for your presentation. So I'm going to present Martin Vermeer, who is already there. Welcome, Martin. Thank you very much for being here with us. Martin Vermeer is based in Brussels, professionally active as European project consultant and academically attached to the University of Jaén, where he will be submitting his doctoral study titled The Prince of Utopia, Thomas More Utopia and the Low Countries. Since 2017, he advocates a series of self-development projects, the Erasmus Project and the Erasmus Peace Project, through which the historical cultural values of Desiderius Erasmus and the Christian humanism are being updated and offered to the EU as the new narrative and practical framework of shared European values. I wish you a lot of luck in this project because I think it's very important. And now we are going to the presentation of Marten Vermeij, who titled Erasmus, Utopia and Empire. Marten, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Miguel, for the opportunity to speak this evening to you all. Indeed, there's a presentation about Erasmus, Utopia and Empire. This is a 19th century painting depicting a joyous entry of Prince Charles. And this brings us to the first year that I will discuss, namely 1515, a very important year in the political career of Charles, the later Charles V, because in this year, Prince Charles was emancipated as the ruler of the Burgundian Low Countries. Before 1515, it was his aunt, Margaret of Austria, who was the ruler, in fact, of the Burgundian Low Countries. But from the year 1515, it will be Charles, Prince Charles, who will be in his own name, in his own capacity, officially, de jure, the ruler of the Burgundian Low Countries. Now, the Burgundian Low Countries is a very complicated political structure because it is in a way a dual layer of both principalities like the Duchy of Brabant and the County of Flanders, the County of Zeeland, the County of Holland and Henegouwen. And next to these principalities, there's also an overall political structure, which is an umbrella state. Is going in the direction of supranational structure almost, that combines all these principalities also under a common label, under a common flag. And this is the flag of the Burgundian Low Countries. Both these Burgundian Low Countries and the principalities that were part of these had their own representative assembly even. It's only the Duchy of Brabant who had the constitutional right that the representative assembly of the Duchy of Brabant could actually legally depose or assign the Duke of Brabant. The other principalities in the Burgundian Low Countries actually wanted to have the same rights, but didn't have the official positive constitution as this Duchy of Brabant in fact had. So only this Duchy of Brabant, as the core of the Burgundian Low Countries, had such constitution, but the other principalities in the Burgundian Low Countries, they also had representative assemblies, but without the constitutional right to depose or assign the ruler of their respective principality. Now, for these Burgundian Low Countries, there was also an overall representative assembly in which the different principalities were sending respective representatives. And so there was this also an overall representative assembly for the Burgundian Low Countries altogether. Now, in 1515, as you all know, Prince Charles was only still 15 years old. And actually, behind him, there were two very strong political figures who were having, in fact, the strings of power in their hands. Actually, they used, in a way, the emancipation of Prince Charles in 1515 to take away the power in practice from his aunt Margaret of Austria as the regent for the Burgundian Low Countries, to take away the practical power from her and to actually have more sway, more swing to exercise the real political power behind the throne of Prince Charles, who is at that time only 15 years old. These two men are at first place Chancellor Jean Le Sauvage, and in this slide you can see the only surviving picture we still have of Chancellor Jean Le Sauvage. This is a book of prayers where in the miniature at the right you can see both Chancellor Jean Le Sauvage and his wife are kneeling before Virgin Mary and baby Jesus. And in the left corner of this illustration, you can see the coat of arms of Jean Le Sauvage, which is a blue field and 3 silver heads of unicorns. The second heavyweight political strongman behind the throne of Prince Charles in 1515 is Guillaume de Croÿ, who has been also the main educator of Prince Charles in previous years. So both men were having the strings of power in their hands and making the major decisions behind the throne in name of Prince Charles as the ruler of the Burgundian Low Countries. Also in the same year, 1515, Erasmus is invited to become the counselor of Prince Charles to guide him further on his political path as ruler of the Burgundian Low Countries. He was invited to become counselor by Jean Le Sauvage. And in practice, it is mostly to Chancellor Jean Le Sauvage that Erasmus will give advice and will cooperate in many ways that will become clear, hopefully, in the following parts. In this illustration, you see him also depicted next to a double portrait made by Quentin Metsès. And the second painting is a painting of Peter Hillis, who is around that time a very important clerk, secretary of the city of Antwerp. And Antwerp was at that time next to Brussels, Leuven, and 's-Hertogenbosch, now in the Netherlands. These 4 cities were the 4 capitals of the Duchy of Brabant. Now, this double portrait was gifted by both men to their third friend, third major Christian humanist, Thomas More. And 1515 is also a very important year in the life and the history of Thomas More, because in that year he would come to the Burgundian Low Countries as an ambassador of the English King Henry VIII. 1515 is the year of the Utopian embassy, the Utopian mission that sends Thomas More to the Low Countries. First, he would go to Bruges, where representatives of King Henry VIII at the one hand and Prince Charles, as ruler of the Burgundian Low Countries, would meet to have trade negotiations, to make a new commercial deal. It's very actual in these times of Brexit negotiations, but maybe these negotiations were even going better, because Thomas More and the representatives of Prince Charles, next to some other English representatives, were meeting in Bruges, where discussions were going on quite well for some time. But then suddenly the representatives of Prince Charles are called back to Brussels. And they are called back by these 2 political figureheads, Jean Le Sauvage and Guillaume de Croÿ. All of a sudden, these negotiations are therefore halted. And all of a sudden, Thomas More has free time to spend leisure and travel further into the Burgundian Low Countries. He would target mainly the city of Antwerp. So he travels to the main port of the Burgundian Low Countries, who took over at that time, 1515, the leading role of economic heart, even for the entire of Europe. No longer Bruges, but Antwerp is at that time, at that moment, the main port for the Burgundian Low Countries. And there, Thomas More would stay in the house of Peter Gillis. And it is Erasmus who arranged the connection between Thomas More and Peter Gillis, because Erasmus before was a friend already of Peter Gillis and a friend of Thomas More separately, but it is Erasmus who will bring these two men, these two Christian humanists and both jurists, together, also for a very special occasion, because in Antwerp, Thomas More and Peter Gillis together would start writing the Book of Utopia, for which also Erasmus would be very active behind the scenes. The Book of Utopia will be published for the first time ever in the Burgundian Low Countries, even in the Duchy of Brabant, in one of the four capitals, namely the city of Leuven. And this first publication is happening in the year 1560. In the same year that Erasmus would publish also for the first time his main political work, the Institutio Principis Christiani. This book would be published for the first time in May of 1516 in Basel. Then 3 months later, in August, a second edition also in Leuven with the same publisher, Dirk Martens, who would publish in the autumn of 1516 in his printing house in Leuven the first edition of the Book of Utopia. Now, this Institutio Principis Christiani is generally known as the main political work of Erasmus, in which he describes the ideal education of a Christian prince. But there is more to this book than the eye reaches, because Institutio has a very double meaning in Latin. Indeed, it can mean education, but then a second possible meaning is also designation. The way in which a political leader, a prince, a duke, a king is installed in his role of the political figurehead, the assignment of a king, of a prince, or a duke. So this is a possible second meaning of Institutio. Next to that, we have also in the title Princeps Christianus, which brings also a double layer in the history of this book, because the Republic, the Christian Republic, Res Publica Christiana, is a synonym the Christian humanists are using for Europe. So there is also a European scope hidden in this title, and it's one of the main reasons that we actually can develop the theory that Erasmus and the Christian humanists, as their ideal system for the entire of Europe, were actually envisaging a structure like the Burgundian Low Countries, but then generalized, extrapolated to the entire of Europe, in which the main powers, the main countries in Europe, France, the German states, Italian states, England, the Spanish kingdoms, would exist next to each other, coexist peacefully, but then would also have a supranational level in which they can cooperate and defend common causes, defend common purposes, without being an empire, because also not in the Burgundian Low Countries, it is also not the supranational level of the Burgundian Low Countries that is having all power. We still have these principalities under the level of the Burgundian Low Countries. Also the principalities of Flanders, Brabant, Zeeland, Holland are still competent and active in many fields. So this kind of supranational level at a European scale doesn't exist at that time. This is completely true. But the Christian humanists are actually filling up this gap. They developed a kind of fictitious European republic, and they called it the Republic of Letters, in which Erasmus was assigned as the Prince of Humanists, of the Prince of this Republic of Letters. This Republic of Letters had even an interior parliament, so it had even the political body of a kind of representative assembly, like also the Burgundian Low Countries had, both at the level of the principalities and at the level of the Burgundian Low Countries supranationally. So this is actually the ideal model of the Christian humanists for Europe. And these are three front pieces of the Book of Utopia. It is in the Book of Utopia that also other main theories, main ideas of the Christian humanists are presented. Namely, the Prince of Utopia is actually the political leader who is assigned by a representative assembly that also brings together representatives of 54 cities in Utopia. So all these cities have their own representative assembly, they have their own prince at the city level, but then they send 3 representatives each to a representative assembly at the level of the utopian state. And then it's not explicitly stated, but also not refused in the Book of Utopia. There could be a figure like the Prince of Utopia, who is also assigned by this parliament with representatives from all the utopian cities. So we have, for the first time in the Book of Utopia, we have there for the first time the idea of a representative democracy, parliamentary democracy, proposed in a way that all the countries in Europe could take over in practice this political system, with the main inspiration from the Duchy of Brabant, that had a constitution that really went very far in this direction. Yeah? Even in the Book of Utopia, even all women can vote and participate in this political process. And as you all know, we have to wait till 20th century till this becomes a reality in most of European countries. Now, what about the constellation between the states in the Book of Utopia? So Utopia, for sure, is not an empire. It's not designed to invade and control all the neighboring countries. The only just cause for a war is the defense of their own sovereignty, their own territory. And then a second cause would be if a neighboring country would suffer under a tyranny, if the people of a neighboring country would be subjected by a tyranny, then also Utopia has the right to come to the rescue and the help of these suffering people. But next to that, there are no other just causes for a war with a neighboring state. So to say that there are many points of similarity between the Burgundian Low Countries and their dual layers and the internal organization of the utopian state, with representative bodies at the level of the city and at the level of the utopian state, but also the international constellation that is speaking out of this, that can be generalized and extrapolated from it, is also very much present in the Book of Utopia. And it is our main theory that Jean Le Sauvage was a very strong supporter of this ideal of the Christian humanists. that he actually was promoting the same at the European scale, and that he was very supportive that this idea would be presented, proposed, and promoted through the Book of Utopia, in which he is even named personally. In one of the prefaces for the Book of Utopia, Paludanus names Jean Le Sauvage the one and only Maecenas or patron of every noble pursuit who summons us. And then also Erasmus' political work, the Institutio Principis Christiani, who was published for the first time in the same year as the Book of Utopia, had also a preface, but only one, while Utopia had many prefaces. And the only preface of the book Institutio Principis Christiani was dedicated to Prince Charles, also very important for our story. So in the same year, 1516, at the beginning, we have also the death of King Ferdinand of Aragon. And following this, this passing of King Ferdinand, Prince Charles would also be declared King of Aragon and Castile from the city of Brussels. So without a lot of negotiations, he was already declared King of Castile and Aragon from Brussels shortly after the passing of King Ferdinand. And this would be a main cause that leads us to the next main year, 1517, in which Prince Charles, together with his councillors, would travel to the Spanish kingdoms. But in the same year, we have also the first edition of Erasmus Querela Pacis. That's next to the Institutio Principis Christiani, the second main political work of Erasmus. And both in the Querela Pacis and in the Institutio, Erasmus made very clear that princes should marry a princess, a future queen, a woman from their own country. So to find a wife in their own country, within their own borders, with a clear objective to avoid too much dynastic combinations. Because in the view of Erasmus and the Christian humanists, this could lead and would lead to main international problems at the European stage. In the same year, we have also the Treaty of Cambrai, and that's a major achievement of Jean Le Sauvage, the Chancellor, in which he brings the main powers, France, the Holy Roman Emperor, which is at that time still Emperor Maximilian, and also Prince Charles as the successor of King Ferdinand. This treaty brings these men together and makes a very strong peace agreement, a peace treaty in which actually war is made illegal, and in which these three main powers commit themselves to come to the defense of one of the other countries if the other country would be invaded and attacked. So you really feel that these activities of Jean Le Sauvage, both in reality, in practice, politically, as also through his support for big literary projects like the Book of Utopia, the Institutio, the Querela Pacis, they are all instigated and protected politically by Jean Le Sauvage as a Maecenas who is guiding, protecting politically, holding his hand protectively over these literary projects. They are going all in the same direction that promotes international constellation of the European states, in which there is no single superpower, in which there is not one dominant power, but a coexistence of neighboring states at the one hand, and at the other hand, a supranational level, without being an empire, in which the European countries collaborate and defend their common interests. So, as I told before, 1517, Charles and his company of councillors would then sail to the Spanish kingdoms to arrange the succession, the ascension to the Spanish thrones of Castile and Aragon. Underway, already one of the main political advisors of Prince Charles, Jérôme de Busleyden, would die. He would not even reach the Spanish kingdoms. He would die in Bordeaux, and then his body would be brought back to the Low Countries, to Malines, where he's buried in the cathedral of St. Rombaud's, in the same city where Jérôme de Busleyden had built a very beautiful Renaissance palace, the Busleyden Hof, the court of Busleyden, in which also guests like Erasmus and even Thomas More were received with all splendor and with magnificent banquets in true Northern Renaissance style. So this main political advisor would already find his end on the way to Spain without even reaching the Spanish kingdoms. Then in 1518, the same happens to Jean le Sauvage. He will die himself in Spain, in Zaragoza, and then his heart would be brought back to the Low Countries, where it would be buried in the Cathedral of Brussels. There would even be built a Sauvage chapel, where his heart and then later the body of his wife would be buried. This chapel, the Sauvage chapel, doesn't exist any longer in the Cathedral of Brussels because this chapel would be destroyed in the mid of 17th century by testament of Infanta Isabella, the daughter of Philip II, who by testament decrees that at this place where before the chapel, the Sauvage chapel, was located, that there another chapel would be constructed. But we can still venerate the Cathedral of Brussels as the lasting tomb of the heart of Jean le Sauvage, with all the ideals he was trying to promote. And this is the castle of Sterrebeek. It's a very green community, very green village in a way, in the surrounding of Brussels, where Jean le Sauvage had his personal castle. So this was the main home of Jean le Sauvage and his family. This castle also doesn't exist any longer. Also, this castle will be destroyed mid-17th century, around the Treaty of Westphalia, when all the main powers in Europe would settle long-lasting wars in the decades before. This is a very important castle for our story and for the travels of Emperor Charles V, because after Charles V would have his main ceremony in which the abdication would be spoken out in the Magna Aula in the Palace of the Koudenberg in Brussels. Shortly afterwards, Emperor Charles V would leave Brussels forever, and before doing that, he would pay a last visit to this castle. So he would conclude his last visit, his last stay in Brussels, with a stay in the castle of Jean le Sauvage, and we can only suspect what Charles V would have been thinking there. My personal estimation is that there, going through all the past experiences, that Emperor Charles V really had to think a lot about the figure of Jean le Sauvage and the ideas, the program Jean le Sauvage, Erasmus, Thomas More were actually having and promoting for the Europe at a larger scale. In the year that Jean le Sauvage would die, 1518, in Zaragoza, in June, 1 month later, Erasmus would change a very important element in his main political work, the Institutio Principis Christiani. Namely, he would make a new letter, the main and the first preface to this book. Before, as I explained, this was a letter dedicated to Prince Charles. Now, Erasmus would take the last letter he wrote to Jean le Sauvage in March of 1518. Erasmus would take this letter, make some changes, and then place it at the head, at the beginning of the Institutio Principis Christiani, as the first preface to his main political work. In my view, with a clear signal that in his view, his ideal political figure, his main living example of a princeps Christianus was Chancellor Jean le Sauvage. Also in a letter from Thomas More directed to Erasmus, Thomas More actually agreed with this. In that letter of 31st October 1516, almost before the first publication of the Book of Utopia, Thomas More would write about Jean le Sauvage as well and describe him as a prince of Utopia if he would have lived in the utopian state. So this is a main and a clear signal, in my view, that Erasmus was giving by taking this last letter to Jean le Sauvage as then the last, because this is also the definitive first preface to the Institutio Principis Christiani, in which Erasmus describes the ideal education of the Christian prince. And in fact, what Erasmus is describing in that book, that a future prince should be educated as a young boy, far away from the court, as a young man, without all the honors that already a royal successor is enjoying. So that actually the ideal context for the education of a future prince, a future ruler, is a normal family, a normal household. And that's an environment actually Jean le Sauvage grew up within, because he came from a civilian family. He was not a nobleman. He grew up as the son of a civilian family, bourgeoisie. They had means, but they were no nobility, and Jean le Sauvage was thus raised far away from the courts. So in practice, Jean le Sauvage is responding much more specifically to conscriptions of Erasmus as the model, the ideal context in which a princeps Christianus is educated. So this is a picture of the San Pablo Church of Valladolid, in which Jean le Sauvage was named the president of the Cortes in also 1518. And this move, in a way, caused the revolt of the Comuneros that started two years later. But if you go to the Wikipedia page of Revolt of the Comuneros, and you go finding this picture, then in the little letters, you can read that the naming of Jean le Sauvage as the president of the Cortes of Castile inside this church, in front of the Cortes of Castile, was one of the main occasions that triggered later on the revolt of the Comuneros. And I think that's indeed true. This is also generally given as a reason, an explication for the revolt of the Comuneros in Castile in 1520, 1521, that the consulars that joined Prince Charles to Spain, all the activities that these consulars were having actually caused the revolt of the Comuneros. But in my theory, there was a group, not the entire group of consulars of Charles, but one part, with Jean le Sauvage as their political leader, were actually triggering this revolt of the Comuneros on purpose, because they actually were trying, in my view, on purpose, that the Spanish kingdoms would have one king, one prince, and the Burgundian Low Countries would have different ruler, of course, with very peaceful relations amongst each other, maybe even brothers, Ferdinand and Charles, but not the same person, because this was also prescribed by Erasmus in the Querela Pacis and in the Institutio. So in my view, Jean Le Sauvage and some others were trying to achieve this in the Spanish kingdoms, but then another group of councillors tried to achieve the opposite objective. And there is a high chance that Jean Le Sauvage was poisoned in Zaragoza and actually found his death and his end in this way. In 1521, at the end of the revolt of the Comineros, Erasmus would leave the Low Countries forever, even with Charles elected Roman emperor and crowned Roman king in 1520. Even with that, Erasmus didn't feel any longer safe in the Low Countries. So this is the house where he would stay 5 months from May till October for the last time ever in the Burgundian Low Countries. This is a house in Anderlecht, now in Brussels region. He would leave then the Low Countries forever and never return, and continue the rest of his life in Switzerland. Still with all these ideals that didn't become a reality, but through his books and through the Book of Utopia, these ideals are given to us, and now we can take lessons from this, and I hope we will do that indeed. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Martin, for this very interesting presentation and communication that give us also an overview, at least, of these important, let's say, documents or political visions that the most important people around Charles V prepared for him, especially during these years previous to the coronation that we are celebrating, commemorating this year. And we know that let's say the impact that Erasmus had on Charles V government, but what will be the legacy of Charles V if he has been good, or he will have realized about the program of Erasmus and the Christian humanist for Europe?
I think, yeah, it would be a far better account than is now the case. And I think also Charles V actually felt this at the end of his life when he abdicates at the court of Brussels in the palace of the Koudenberg. He is even explicitly asking for forgiveness, because he said he asks explicitly forgiveness that he didn't, that he wasn't capable of achieving peace and peace in Europe, and also the unity in Europe, that he was not able to guarantee this as was actually the plan at the beginning. And he asks explicitly forgiveness for that, and he refers to errors as a young man, also passions and normal human mistakes. And I think at the end of his life, he's really sincerely sorrowful about this. Also, this last visit to the castle of Jean Le Sauvage, in my view, it really shows that at the end of his life, before leaving Brussels forever even, he wants to meet the spirit, meet the ghost in a way of Jean Le Sauvage and Erasmus again. Because at that time, at the end of his life, I think he really realizes that if he would have followed much more in practice already from the start, the program of the Christian humanists, the program of Jean Le Sauvage, that the achievements of his reign would be completely different. Then it could be the reign as a ruler of the Burgundian countries, or the rule of Charles as king of the Spanish kingdoms, one of both. but they are completely noble in both ways. But then maybe with his brother at the other side, with peaceful relations with France, with England, and then all together much stronger to defend European interests against the Turks, also very actual at this time. So this is a completely other story then. Of course, he was very young indeed, still at the age of 19, 20, very, very young. I'm 36 now. I can't imagine to have been placed with such power at such young age. And also his grandfather is really a spider in the web. Maximilian, Emperor Maximilian, is now hidden behind all this a bit, but we can be assured that behind the scenes he was very active in arranging that indeed his grandson would become his successor as a Roman emperor. So it's not only personally all on his conto, of course, but I think at the age of 55, with the wisdom of the 50 years, I think he really realized that all these ideals of Erasmus Jean Le Sauvage, that they are not so idealistic and naive and dreamy as they maybe look at the first place, but this is a major lesson for us and for the European Union also today, that these big ideals, these major values, how idealistic they may look, the most practical way to defend our European interests on the long term is really executing, making reality of these big ideals in practice, in reality of everyday life.
Thank you very much, Martin. But we could say, just because of your answer, that in some way, also maybe, as you say, he was too young, Charles V, when he was receiving this, let's say, legacy or ideas for the development of the political system. But we could say that what he lacked was the experience, because the directions were maybe the right ones, and maybe he could have avoided many problems. But he didn't have the experience to apply and to implement these, let's say, rules.
For sure indeed. And he was not raised at a normal household, a normal family, a small house like Jean Le Sauvage was, but he was raised in the middle and at the focal point of major European courts. So imagine that you grow up and that all the people around you are giving you all the attention, already knowing that you would become a future prince, a future king. This is not a normal context to grow up as a young man. This really would go to the head of everyone.
And as you say, the shadow of his grandfather, Massimiliano, was there all the time. And I wonder how close was the theory of Emperor Charles V connected with the ideas of the Roman imperialism?
I think quite close. I also followed the first session of this very, very interesting conference, in which a lot was said about different theories of empire, which is of course true. But then when Jean Le Sauvage dies, 1518, his successor as the Grand Chancellor is Mercurino di Gattinara, who constructs a theory of the Monarchia Universalis. And for these ideas, for this political system all over Europe, Gattinara takes major inspiration from two Italian humanists, from Alighieri Dante. And Dante's main political work is named De Monarchia, in which he completely agrees with the model of a Roman emperor. And also a second Italian humanist is going in the same direction. And these two Italian humanists are giving major inspiration to Gattinara, who has major influence on the policies, the decisions of Charles V till 1530, because Gattinara still has the chance to watch Charles V become emperor officially to be crowned by the Pope. Catinara can still witness this, but then dies shortly afterwards. And then afterwards, Charles V makes some changes in his administration, but still then he divides the main regencies of his dominions over very, very close family members. His wife for the Spanish countries, his brother for the Austrian, the German lands, then his sister for the Burgundian Low Countries. So very, very close to his family, as we also see happening in the Trump administration, that's giving main political powers and roles given to the son-in-law of Donald Trump, his daughter. In a way, it reflects this familia. So that is that. And then at the time also there are some secret written clauses in which Charles V regulates how his wife, his sister, and his brother should cooperate with him. So which decisions he can still make, and we can be sure that he still will have the final word in all these domains. That is certain that this also would be arranged behind the scenes. So I think all by all, the legacy of Roman Empire is very strong. Even his retirement, he is doing this also having in mind the example of Diocletianus, also a main Roman emperor who also divided, restructured the rule in the Roman Empire with tetrarchs for two Augusts, two Caesars, but still also Diocletianus is a major Roman emperor who had was a very active prosecutor of Christians as well. Also, if Charles V would have followed much more in practice the very practical proposals in religious affairs, it's maybe possible that the church even wouldn't have been broken as it has been with the Reformation, if from the start, but then already from 1517, if all the political leaders, not only Charles, but also Francis in France and Henry VIII, if they all would have implemented and supported in practice the proposals of Erasmus about religious reconciliation and about reform, internal reform of the Catholic Church, also with the Parliament and with main reformations that we see now only happening for the first time under Pope Francis. So he's at heart also a very, very convinced Christian humanist, Pope Francis. So one of the dreamed changes inside the Catholic Church are now putting in place maybe for the first time. If this would have happened from 1517 or a bit earlier, then we can be assured that the Catholic Church even wouldn't have been broken. And that's also a main sorrow, has been a main sorrow throughout the life of Charles V. And I think he also, at the end of his life, he starts realizing this more and more as well.
Okay, so we could say in some way that he had followed these rules, that many things would have been different from what the history was at the end, and Charles V could have avoided many of the problems he had during his mandate. Maybe we could finish with this statement. You also talk about the system of utopia, and I wonder what was the relation between this system of utopia and the one present in the Burgundy and the Low Countries at that period?
Very, very close. So this Duchy of Brabant, which is at the heart of the Burgundian Low Countries, had a very special political system. It's actually the first time in Europe that a principality developed a kind of representative democracy at the beginning. Even the Magna Carta in England didn't go as far as that. The Duchy of Brabant, this core country of the Low Countries, had a constitution from the 14th century on, from the mid-14th century, it was called the joyous entry that gave the constitutional right to the parliament, the representative assembly of the Duchy of Brabant, to depose or assign the Duke of Brabant. And it is through the Book of Utopia that this political system, for the first time ever, is distributed, recommended, and proposed at a European scale. And these connections between the political system of the utopian state and the Duchy of Brabant is, in my view, also the main reason why these cities, these capitals of Brabant, are also so prominent in the Book of Utopia, because the book, the story of Utopia, opens in the city of Antwerp, one of the four capitals of the Duchy of Brabant. The book was published for the first time in Leuven, another capital of the Duchy of Brabant. And then the political power center, Brussels, plays a major role in the genesis of the Book of Utopia, because it's from the court of Brussels that Jean le Sauvage calls back the representatives of Charles to come back to Brussels. And this gave the occasion to Thomas More to travel further during the free time. So also Brussels is playing a very big role in the genesis of the Book of Utopia. And in my view, this is an honor, paying tribute to the capitals of Brabant, to the Duchy of Brabant, that is so closely connected to the Book of Utopia.
So thank you very much. We can see from your presentation the importance these publications had also today, because you bring your presentation several times during the answering of your questions to nowadays Europe, even with what is happening in the United States. Let's see what happened with after the final counting of the votes during these elections. If we continue with this imperial vision of the war, of it changed a little bit. You also mentioned the Pope Francis as someone taking or considering some of these ideas that were already published 500 years ago, like this need of changing the Christianity and the church. So in your presentation, help us to understand the Europe today from the past, because we can see in your communication that direct connection about the Europe we are having right now, and maybe also what Europe could be if Charles V had taken other decisions following the directrices and the rules or the orientations in these publications that he then or was enabled maybe to follow. Maybe the why he wasn't able to follow despite his experience of the age, maybe is something that we have to study a little bit more, because I can imagine also there was many influence from many people that didn't want to have strong changes at that period. And maybe this is something we can discuss in a future seminar. But I think for today we have finished our time, so I have to thank you very much for your presentation. For the people that is following us, thank you very much for your participation. I must say anyway that it's a pity you didn't put more questions on the table, because it was a very good opportunity to answer Martin about all these things that he was presenting us. But anyway, I'm sure that it was very interesting also for them. I would like also to announce that we will have a publication at the end of these 4 webinars that we are organizing around the commemoration of the anniversary of the coronation of Charles V, that will be published next year, so people will be able to go deeper on this topic. And I also would like you not only to present in the paper you will give us for the publication what was your presentation, but also the answers to the questions that we put you on this webinar. So thank you very much for everybody. Now we'll leave you with a short video of the organization which is organizing this webinar, which is the Roots of Emperor Charles V, which is a cultural root of the Council of Europe. And see you again on 19th November at 4:30 for the next webinar. In that occasion, it will be in Spanish. So we have here all this mix of also European accents. You are from here, from Belgium, where I am also right now. I am in Spanish, and Maria Fatima had this Portuguese, also English accent. So that is also a richness of these webinars we are organizing. So thank you very much, Martin, and see you all in the next forum, in the next webinar on November 19th. Thank you very much for everybody, and see you soon. Bye. We can put the video now to finish the webinar. It's not this one, it's the one on the roots of Charles V. Just let me